Welcome to Module 6, Monitoring, Operations, and Troubleshooting. This first lesson builds the observability foundation everything else in the module depends on. We'll set up Azure Virtual Desktop Insights end-to-end, understand exactly which log analytics tables carry which data, and write real KQL queries against verified table and column names, not guesses. By the end, you'll be able to find connection failures, track round-trip time, and calculate session duration for any user in your environment. Azure Virtual Desktop Insights is not a separate product. It's a dashboard built on Azure Monitor workbooks, reading out of a log analytics workspace you point at your environment. On any new deployment, open it at aka.ms/avdi and run the check configuration workbook first. It audits whether your diagnostic pipeline is actually wired up and gives you one-click remediation when it isn't. To view it, you need two read-only roles: Desktop Virtualization Reader and Log Analytics Reader. Insights depends on two feeds that are easy to set up only one of. First, resource diagnostic settings on the host pool and workspace objects themselves, covering categories like management activities, feed, connections, errors, checkpoints, host registration, and agent health status. Second, session host telemetry, which requires installing the Azure Monitor Agent on every session host and associating it with a data collection role. That second piece is per virtual machine, not per resource, and it's exactly what people forget when they add new hosts to an existing pool. One fact you cannot get wrong on the exam or in production: the legacy Log Analytics Agent, sometimes called the MMA Agent, is not a valid choice for new monitoring. It was deprecated in August 2024, its data upload path was paused briefly in January 2026 as a shutdown warning, and its backend services stopped completely on March 2, 2026. If you walk into an environment still using it, treat migrating to the Azure Monitor Agent as urgent infrastructure work, not routine maintenance. Every table related to Azure Virtual Desktop carries the WVD prefix, a holdover from the service's original name. The ones you'll use constantly are WVD connections for connection lifecycle and state, WVD errors for failures with a service error flag telling you whether to escalate to Microsoft, WVD agent health status for per host heartbeat and status roughly every 30 seconds, and WVD connection network data for round trip time and estimated bandwidth per connection. Casing and pluralization matter more than you'd expect. It's WVD host registrations and WVD feeds, both plural, and WVD management, not WVD management activities. WVD checkpoints tracks the specific steps reached inside an activity, like which app a user opened. And WVD connections uses a small state machine with values started, connected, and completed, which is exactly what lets you calculate session duration. Get any of these names slightly wrong and your query will run successfully and just return nothing, which is worse than an error. Your first go-to query is against WVD errors. Filter to the last day, then split on the service error column. When it's false, the issue is something you can likely resolve yourself, a configuration or permissions problem. When it's true, it's a service-side issue and you escalate to Microsoft support, always including the correlation ID so they can trace the exact event. Grouping by code symbolic quickly surfaces your top recurring failure causes. For network quality, WVD connection network data holds an estimated round trip time in milliseconds and estimated available bandwidth. Bin that hourly and render it as a time chart to spot degradation trends. For session duration, there's no single column for it. You join WVD connections to itself on correlation ID, treating the connected state row as the start time and the completed state row as the end time for that same connection, then take the difference between the two timestamps. A dashboard you have to remember to open won't catch a 2 a.m. problem. Wrap your highest value queries in Azure Monitor Log Alert rules, routed to an action group that emails, posts to Teams, or pages your on-call engineer. Start small: a spike in admin actionable WVD errors, any session host reporting unhealthy agent status for more than a few minutes, and a sustained rise in round trip time are enough to start. Too many noisy alerts is how monitoring gets ignored a few weeks after go live. On a brand new AVD environment, here's the sequence. Create a dedicated Log Analytics workspace for AVD data. Run the check configuration workbook and fix every gap it flags. Deploy the Azure Monitor Agent and a data collection rule to every session host, ideally enforced automatically through Azure policy as new hosts join. Confirm data is actually flowing with a simple query against WVD connections. Then build 2 or 3 log alerts before you consider monitoring finished. Everything else in this module, image lifecycle, troubleshooting, day 2 operations, assumes this pipeline is already live.